Hey Raven, I hope you're doing well and thank you for reading all the stories I've written so far. You even made my mess of jumbled memories last time sound amazing. I put this batch off while I asked some family for some facts about the incident. For reference, I'm 37, and these stories all took place before I was 9 years old. On to the history. I was raised by my aunt and uncle, and I called them Mom and Dad. My mother had gotten cancer when I was a year old and had to give me and my sister up. My father was a cheating drunk and couldn't be trusted to raise 2 children, so the state gave us to our aunt. From the day that I started stringing sentences together, I told my aunt and sister of the wolf in the wall. My aunt thought that it was just an imaginary friend, until he started telling me things that I couldn't have known or understood, like, the phone bill is due tomorrow, or Dad is smoking pot in the back of the garage, or even, Mom can't find her car keys, they're under the couch. And he even told me one time where my uncle hid his guns, and that I should never ever touch them. No one knows exactly what happened between me and the wolf, but one day I ran to my sister, very scared, and said that he had attacked me. It's from this point that I do remember. From then on, anytime a wolf howled on TV or someone made a howling noise, wolves that only I could see would come out from the corners of whatever room I was in and surround me, baring their teeth and snarling. It got so bad that anything wolf-related was banned from the house, and my aunt and uncle moved furnitures into all the corners to block the wolves. I went through a lot of therapy over this, but it didn't help much. My fear of wolves persists even today, and I couldn't make a wolf howl sound if my life depended on it. The next story I remember in its entirety, and I confirmed a few details with my aunt the last time we spoke. It was Thanksgiving. I was 5 or 6 years old, and refusing to eat my squash. We didn't know at the time that I was allergic to gooseneck squash, and I kept telling my aunt that it made my tummy feel funny. We had a don't waste food rule in the house, so I was sent to bed early. The whole family was there, so I climbed into bed crying from the embarrassment. I had just settled in when I heard a voice under my bed saying my name. One of my other uncles liked to pull little pranks on me to cheer me up, so I asked, "Uncle E, is that you?" But the voice just continued saying my name. Realizing that it couldn't be my uncle, I asked who was there. That's when a huge creature rose next to my bed, inches from me. It looked like a wolf or a dog, half rotten and covered in warts, but it stood on 2 legs, wore a cloak, and had 2 massive leathery wings on its back. Also, its hands were that of a human, just warty and gnarled, with claws instead of fingernails. It leaned over me and said, "Come with me." I asked where, and it just told me again, "Come with me." A little more insistent and loud this time. I asked it why, and it said once more, "Come with me." This time very loudly, and offered me its hand. I screamed, "No!" and smacked its hand away. And then I screamed, "Help! Mom? Dad?" The thing quickly bared its fangs and grabbed my arm. I blacked out. I woke up in the morning with my arm hanging off the bed, but I was still in my room. I had a large burn on my arm where that thing had grabbed me, and I had to be taken to the emergency room. As for the details from my aunt, she remembers hearing me scream no, and calling for help, but thought that I was just throwing a tantrum. My Uncle E offered to come check on me, but was told not to when my screaming suddenly stopped. They thought I had just given up on the tantrum and fallen asleep. It wasn't until the next day that my aunt was worried. She reasoned with myself that I had burned my arm on the stove, or the oven, and that I'd covered it up with my sweater. But it never sat right with her as the burn wrapped around my forearm. It wasn't until I brought it up that she realized why that reasoning didn't fit. The last story that I have for you today is on a much kinder note. After that Thanksgiving, I became very afraid of the dark, and would often climb into bed with my aunt and uncle when I was too scared to sleep. Their solution was to buy me a carousel lamp. It was just a light bulb on a short base with a thin plastic carousel that rotated around the bulb when it heated up. It would light the room and project pictures onto the wall. One night, I got in bed, turned on the lamp, and rolled over to watch the pictures when I heard a woman say softly, "Open the window." It was almost a whisper, but she had a kind voice that I didn't recognize. I asked who she was, and she said, "Open the window," again. I looked out the window and didn't see anyone or anything, so I opened it. She then said, "Good. Now, sleep well and good night, sweet Quinn," like a mother would say to her son, and I quickly drifted off to sleep. I woke in the morning to the fire alarm. My uncle rushed in the room, which was full of smoke. The carousel had shrunk, wrapped around the bulb, and caught fire. He threw it and the blazing curtains out the window and then carried me running out of the room. Once he caught his breath, he asked, "Why was the window open?" And I told him, "A nice lady told me to open it." He told me it was a good thing that she did, but reminded me of stranger danger. I told him that I couldn't see the lady, but I don't think that he believed me. I know, though, that whatever or whoever she was, she saved our home, and possibly our lives that night. Had the window been closed, it would have been held closed by a hand screw that my uncle wouldn't have been able to reach to open it, and the fire would have spread to more than just my curtains. Thanks to these events, I know that I am not alone, and that not all things that go bump in the night are scary or evil. Just like people, there are some bad apples, sure, but sometimes they're just there to watch you and keep you safe. And thank you again, Raven. A while back, I posted a story on here about my dad being followed home by duendes when he was a kid. You guys really liked it, so I figured I would share another story. 3, actually. As it turns out, my mom, dad, and cousin each have a story that takes place on the same patch of road in Mexico. I'll tell them as they were relayed to me individually. My parents actually met here in the United States, but they grew up in neighboring pueblos in Mexico. Connecting the two pueblos is a long, empty span of road, maybe 5 miles long, which is apparently haunted. These stories take place many years apart, but on the exact same patch of road. First, my father's horse is distressed. When my dad was a young man, he loved horses, jaripeos, and drinking. While he has since put down the bottle, he still loves horses and jaripeos. But back in the day, he would occasionally ride his horse out across the road to the neighboring pueblo to hang out or hit up some parties. One early morning, he was returning home on horseback from a party in the neighboring pueblo. He was a bit drunk and was just casually making his way home when suddenly the air grew still and the night went silent. He said that something just felt off and his horse could sense it as well. My dad says that you can always tell what a horse is focusing on by looking at their ears. And in this case, my dad's horse's ears were perked up stiff and focusing at the empty field beside them, as well as all around them. Thinking that there may be some sort of animal stalking them, my dad looked around, but the fields beside them were empty, and there weren't any bushes or things for an animal to hide behind. Suddenly, the air went cold, and my dad felt goosebumps on the back of his neck, almost as if something was right behind him. And that's when my dad's horse couldn't take it anymore and took off running for its life. My dad held on tightly and tried several times to bring the horse to a stop, but it was dead set on getting the hell away from whatever they had just encountered. Eventually, they finally reached their pueblo, and the horse calmed down and came to a stop. Never before or after had that horse behaved that way, and it left my dad shook up. Needless to say, he was sober by the time he reached home. Second story, my cousin's passenger. My cousin is a few years older than me, so this story takes place many years after my dad's. One late night, my cousin was driving my uncle's pickup truck. He didn't make any mention of where he was heading, or in which direction, but he said that he was making his way across that same stretch of road. He said that when he was driving along, and all seemed very calm, when suddenly he felt a presence in the vehicle. This pickup truck is one of those older two-door pickup trucks, which have a single long bench-style seat for the driver and passenger. My cousin says that he felt the passenger side of the seat sink in, as if someone suddenly took a seat beside him. He said that the experience scared him stiff, and had him so shook up that he was cold sweating and crying, thinking that this might be the moment he was going to die. Instinctually, he dared not turn around to face whatever it was that was sitting beside him. But the presence was so real, and he could even make out some sort of silhouette there beside him through his peripheral vision. After a couple of miles of panic and sobbing, he eventually reached the neighboring pueblo and the presence gradually faded away. He made it home safe, but the experience has scarred him. And third story, my mom and cousin spot a hitchhiker. This last one is short, and actually only took place a couple of years ago. This happened to my cousin from the previous story, and my mom. A couple of years ago, my mom visited Mexico to hang with family. Her return flight home was in the early morning, so my aunt had my cousin drive her to the airport. Along the way, on that same patch of road, they spotted a man hitchhiking on the side of the road. This was a very strange sight, as not many people hitchhike along that road, much less early in the morning before the sun even comes out. As you might deduce from the last couple of stories, land around that road is largely empty. There's not really any good reason to be out there at that time. Jokingly, my cousin suggested they pick him up. Everybody in the car nervously laughed it off, and they drove past the man. As they continued along, however, they swore that they could hear someone whistling at them from out in the empty fields. This made them all very nervous, and wondered if the man, whatever he was following them. Eventually, they reached the neighboring pueblo, where they also swore they spotted him standing just outside the entrance. So, this was 6 years ago. I was 12 and I had just gotten back from school and I had my lunch and was watching TV because that was a thing for me back then. My parents were out and my grandma was sleeping in her room. Randomly, my peripheral vision picks up something from the room next to the TV. I tried to ignore it because, well, I was trying to enjoy my favorite cartoon, and soon I felt something move in the room. My eyes turn and meet the teeth of a person. I try to see what or who it is, and all I see is a black figure smiling at me with its teeth wide open. It was a woman, by the looks of it, and I for one was shocked and couldn't really move. I was frozen. I kept looking at it for a solid 5 seconds, and when she started moving towards me, that's when I was like, screw this crap. I got up, ran towards it, and slammed the door shut and ran into our backyard. I couldn't get myself together. I couldn't breathe. I kept staring at the house, checking every door and window to see if something was following me. When I finally calmed down, which took about 10 minutes, I went inside. The door was still closed, so that was a good sign. I went and checked on my grandma, who seemed to be still sleeping. I wanted to wake her up, but I just couldn't. I don't really know why. I just sat in front of the TV, staring at my favorite show, trying to ignore the fear and everything that had happened, and just praying for it to be a nightmare. But it was real. After a while, my parents came home and I felt safer, and I called my friend and told him everything. I strangely forgot about the incident, I don't know how, and I never told my parents about it until a month ago when a horror movie triggered the memory of the figure with teeth, or whatever it was. My parents refused to believe it, as I hadn't told them about it for 6 years, and they believed that it was a dream. But my friend remembers it, and it was very real. I never saw anything like that after that day, except for a strange night last week. I'll tell you all about that in the next post. I believe it to be a spirit. I don't know what kind, but it was something. I tried to rule it out as a hallucination too, as kids tend to hallucinate sometimes. But yeah, that's my story. I was never really afraid of the dark. Well, I guess at some point when I was small I was afraid of the dark, but I soon grew out of it. I had to grow out of it. I had to learn to not be afraid, simply because life would be way too complicated if I was afraid. I grew up in the mid-north of Sweden, in a small village with old wooden houses. Not too many people lived in the village, and not in any village nearby. Not too many people had ever lived in that village, because the soil is meager and the farming season is short. And the amount of food that can be produced in an area is small and can't support many people. The farming season is short, but the winters are long, cold, and dark. Very dark. Around midwinter, the sun would rise at 9:30 and set at 2 o'clock. It was dark when I left for school in the morning and dark again when I came home from school. There were a few streetlights in the village, around 8 or 10. It was, as I said, a small village. When I came home, it was time to take the family dog for a walk. Quite a long walk. He'd been inside the house for the whole day and would be quite jittery. So, of course, I could walk along the main road beneath the 8 or 10 streetlights, but it was too short and quite boring. And dangerous. Cars are dangerous, and even more so in the darkness. Or I could head out into the forest. It wasn't a big deal. Cars are dangerous. Walking along a road in darkness is dangerous, even under the streetlights. But the forest, on the other hand, it's totally safe. Even in the darkness. Even when I could not see anything. The worst thing that could happen is encountering a moose. They can be dangerous for sure, but normally they aren't. A moose would normally stand by the side of the road pretending it's not there at all. An animal consisting of 600 kilograms of muscles, antlers, and hooves, trying to convince you it's not even there or that it is something completely different. It may be a horse or so. Or, anyway, it's not your problem at all. They might be standing in the middle of the road, angrily stamping their hooves in the ground, but then you'll hear them. But long before that, our dog would have smelled them and reacted very strongly to them, and we would have turned around. That happened several times. Or that I heard something, a creak, a branch snapping, sounds of a creature moving around in the forest, a roar or a shriek of an unknown animal. Of course, I could be afraid of those things as a kid, but darkness itself, no, it didn't scare me. It just sharpened my other senses. And the things that I heard in the forest, they weren't dangerous anyway. They were animals, normal animals, deers and moose and foxes and owls. Normal animals making normal sounds. There was never anything spooky in the forest. At home? No, that's a whole different story. I wouldn't say that I lived in a haunted house. It sounds too dramatic. It wasn't dramatic at all. Let's just say that there was a presence in our house. Quite often it felt like if someone was standing behind your shoulder, looking at what you were doing. Not menacingly, just standing there. As if to make sure that I did whatever I did properly. And the sounds? Quite often one could hear totally normal sounds. A car entering the driveway, a car door closing shut, footsteps on gravel, someone opening the front door to the house. It's just that there was no one there. No car in the driveway, nobody entering the house, nothing. Our house was an old farmhouse. People had lived there throughout the years, maybe some of them had left some traces in the building, as if their spirits had been recorded in the walls, in the floor, and in the roof of the house. Like some kind of tape recording, but in timber and wood. But there was nothing spooky in the forest. Why would there be? Most parts of the forest were always empty. No humans had ever lived there. Our village of 30 people was in a valley along a small creek. If you followed the creek to the east, there were a few homesteads. 2 or 3 kilometers north of the village, there had been a small cottage. It was said to have been inhabited until the 1950s. I have searched for it, but I can never find any remains of it. Not too far from it, there was also said to be an elven stone, which is like a stone altar or a place of worship. For worship of what, I'm not really sure. I could never find the elven stone either. An older man in the village had found it once, with some clear evidence that it had been used in modern times, maybe in the 50s or 60s. 1.5 to 2 kilometers southwest of the village, I had found the remnants of a stone-reinforced burrow in the ground, but I don't think it was inhabited all year round. I think it was used for remote farming, or when harvesting swamp-growing sedges, or when herding cattle and goats. Typically when a place is empty of people, it's because whoever lived there either starved to death or moved to some place where they could eat. Any area where crops could grow would be utilized. But most of the area around the village was barren pine hills, and unless you found a way to eat stones, shrubs, and lichens, and there was simply no place big enough to support a family outside the village before you came to one of the surrounding villages. So, I learned to live by this. If I followed the dirt roads into the forest, I was safe. Even in the darkness, I was safe. My night vision became really good, and the darkness would sharpen my hearing and my sense of smell, and my other senses as well. The ones you use to feel if something is off. We would often venture into the forest, my dog and I. In the winter, we stayed on the dirt roads because the snow made it too cumbersome to walk on the small trodden paths, and almost impossible to cross straight through the landscape. If the roads were hard enough, I would often use a small and light kick sled, where you could reach quite high speeds, especially downhill. The feel of that speed was exhilarating, as you were so close to the ground, and I enjoyed it a lot as a kid. Many years later, I was a young adult by now. Our dog had grown into a grumpy old man some years before, and one morning he just didn't want to get up anymore. He died later that day. I still enjoyed going out into the forest though, but now I had to go out alone. I felt safe in the forest. If everything else in my life went haywire, I still felt safe and secure and calm in the wilderness among the trees. Far away, in the innermost part of the forest, there was a small lake. I always loved that lake. It looked so beautiful, so tranquil, so peaceful, and almost magical. If you ever believed in elves, this is where you would look for them. Or you could imagine fairies dancing in the fogs rising from the lake during early dusk, if you dared to visit it during the nighttime. But I had only been there during summer and autumn, never during the winter. So one evening in late December, I decided to visit the lake, taking a tour on the kick sled to see how far I would get. If there were tire tracks in the snow all the way to the lake, in probably less than an hour. If there were no tire tracks, it would take me longer, maybe 2 hours. And then I might want to turn around a bit earlier. The lake was at a high altitude, so once I was there, I would be able to get back home quite quickly, since it was down hills almost all of the way home. So, I left the house on the kick sled and headed out into the deep forest. Once I got into the forest, it was much darker than I had anticipated. So what, you may say? It was night. What did you expect? Well, the truth is, snow reflects light really well. If there's just a little bit of moonlight, I would have been able to see fairly well, especially as my night vision was really good. I should have been able to see quite well even with just the starlights reflecting in the snow, but there was no moonlight at all, and the sky was cloudy, so there was no starlight either. I can make out where the forest road stretched, where the snow walls at the side of the road were, and I could make out the trees and the tree line against the dark sky, but that was about it. Since I could figure out where the road was and the snow walls on the side of the road, I continued. As I said before, I wasn't really afraid of the dark, even if I preferred being able to see. So, I continued deeper into the forest. I stopped from time to time to listen, to hear if there were any animals around, or something else that I needed to be aware of. I didn't want to crash into a moose standing in the middle of the road, nor did I want to encounter some rally-kale training for Rally on what he thought was an empty road. But I could hear nothing. So I stepped up the speed on the kick sled and continued deeper into the darkness and the cold. But suddenly I saw something that I didn't want to see. A light coming from behind me. Was there a car coming from behind? Did he see me? Was he driving fast? Was it some hopeful wannabe rally driver in training? I stopped immediately, but I could not hear anything. I looked behind me. There was no car behind me, and no other light. The sky had a uniform dark anthracite color in all directions. All the pine trees and the firs had the same pitch black color. There weren't the slightest traces of light anywhere. Confused, I turned back. Had I made it all up? Was it my imagination? Well, apparently. I continued my trek into the forest. Suddenly, I saw it again. There was definitely a light shining from behind me. I stopped again, looked behind me, but all I could see was darkness. A totally uniform darkness in either direction. If I looked forward, the faint light that I had just seen seconds ago wasn't there anymore, and I couldn't hear anything special. Maybe there was some kind of reflection in my glasses, but it didn't make any sense. There can't be any light reflecting in my glasses if there isn't any light at all. There was no reason for me to stop or to turn around, so I continued. I came to think about it right then. It just hadn't occurred to me before. Maybe nobody had ever lived in the forest, but people still had died here in the forest. I knew about one case just a few years before. No one that I knew, a stranger from town, but how many more? People had worked in the woods for all ages, with forestry, mining, foraging, fishing. Who knows how many of them had died here? Sooner or later, the light goes out for everybody. It might as well happen at work as at home. It might as well happen in the woods as on a field or something else. Then, I saw it again. Yeah, it was definitely a light from behind, illuminating the trees in front of me. This is how it looked. When you're standing on a road in the darkness, and a car approaches you from far behind with its headlights shining in your direction, and on everything in front of you. This time I didn't bother to stop and look for a car, because I knew there wouldn't be any car. I was alone. Well, sort of alone. Don't misunderstand me, I'm not afraid of the dark. Not as long as the darkness stays dark. I'm not afraid of knowing that there is something out there. Something I can hear or smell but not see. I'm not afraid of that. But knowing nothing is out there but I'm still seeing something, it doesn't make any sense. And I don't like things that don't make sense. So, I've been listening to your stories and loving them for a few months now. Your narration is calming no matter how scary the story ends up being, so I can sleep soundly after listening. It's now my nightly habit. Thank you for that. The experiences I'm about to tell you about are about a house I bought with my husband in 1994 and lived in for about 26 years. I'm going to have to put the stories in parts as the incidents escalated into so many over this timeline that it would be too long. Anyways, let's start at the beginning. So, this house was located in a city in Canada. It was in a neighborhood built in the 1970s. The house was custom built on the show home street of the neighborhood. It was one of the nicest, located on a hill that graduated up into a natural reserve. My husband and I were living in a crappy area, and because we had 2 young children, 2 and 4 years old, we were looking to buy something nicer. We had always dreamed of living in the area this house was located in, especially on the street that it was on, but, of course, the prices were out of our price range. Still, I kept my eyes on the listing for that area, and to my delight, I finally found one that we could afford. It seemed like a small miracle. Houses there sold for $50,000 to $70,000 more than what this one was listed at. It was beautiful. Brick, spacious, stone masonry fireplace upstairs, Victorian molding in the ceiling, a full basement. The couple that were selling said they needed to move soon. The husband had a job in another city. After a brief look around, noting the basement was kind of creepy, and the upstairs seemed too dark, we decided with lighter paint and curtains, We could make it much brighter. We moved in and happily redecorated our dream house, except the basement. Then, the first incident took place. My 4-year-old's room was across from the kitchen. One day she was in the yard playing and I went into her room. She had a box of toys and, near the top, a large toy fire engine truck. It was stable in the box, and had sat there every day without anything moving. But on this day, as I turned to leave the room, I glanced back, and the fire engine literally flew off in midair, about 3 feet out of the box. I was stunned. It didn't fall out, it flew out. I told my husband, but he couldn't come up with an explanation, and neither could I. A few months later, my daughter was downstairs in the basement living room, which we had made into a playroom as well. I was in the kitchen making lunch and heard her coming up the stairs. I went to the staircase and asked, "Are you ready for lunch?" "Who was that lady?" she replied cheerfully. I stopped. "What lady?" "The lady on the stairs," she said. "The one that took my hand and helped me up the stairs." My heart started to quicken. Was someone in the basement? I told her to go to the kitchen and stay there. I grabbed a knife from the counter, my phone, which was a cordless landline, and shaking, I headed down the stairs. I peeked around the first corner into the spare room, but nothing. I opened the bathroom door, nothing. I checked the playroom and the laundry room, and even the cold room, but nothing. Heart still pounding, I went back upstairs and asked her more about this lady. She said that she had brown hair, was wearing a dress, and looked like a mom. I didn't want to scare her as she didn't appear afraid at all, so I told her to tell me if she ever saw that lady again. She agreed that she would, and then happily munched on her sandwich. I told myself at the time that it could have been a guardian angel, as I have heard that all children have one. My husband said that it was just her imagination, but the way that she said it was so casual. I didn't think that it was imagination. Still, I didn't have any other explanation. I didn't know then that things would escalate into absolute chaos in that house, only a few years after. But that story is for another day. I strongly believe in the paranormal. Although I don't find it that scary, it's more interesting than anything. I just thought that I would share my experiences from my life. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I moved into a new home, which seems to be a tiny bit haunted, but yeah. Anyways, sometime at night, I had come out of the shower and left the bathroom. For some context, my brother's room is at the end of the hall. The bathroom is on the side, so when you turn towards the end of the hall, leaving/entering the bathroom, you can see into my brother's room. As I was leaving, I saw a figure that I assumed to be my brother, just standing there. It spoke to me in a similar voice as well, but something was off about it. All the thing said was, "Hello there." It was odd, so I gave him a weird look and just responded with a confused hello back. I moved away from my doorway and headed towards the steps. When I turned back, it had gone into the bathroom and shut the door behind it. I was just thinking, okay, whatever, he's weird, and went downstairs. Nobody passed me. No one was behind me or in front of me. When I got to the basement to put my clothes in the basket, everybody else was in the basement as well, including my brother, who was in the freezer looking for hot dogs, and he hadn't been in his room for a while. Later, I told my mom about the boy that I saw, and she told me that she had seen the balloon that was in the corner of the dining room get yanked down, as though someone was pulling on it multiple times. She said that she was able to communicate to it through the balloon. I don't remember exactly what she asked, but I do remember her telling it that it needed to leave. After that, the balloon didn't move any longer. Although, that's not the end of it. When I was home by myself later at night, I was eating at the dining room table when I heard the sound of someone running down the steps, and then abruptly stopping. I looked over towards the direction of the stairs, and nobody was there. I was scared at the time and called my mom to ask when she would be home, which she said she would be home soon, so I sat and watched TV until she did. Another time I was home by myself, I was again eating at the dining room table when I thought I saw someone running in front of me in the kitchen, back and forth. It could have been my eyes playing a trick on me, or something, but it still scared me at the time, so I went and sat outside for a little bit before going back inside and watching TV to distract myself. When I got older, things didn't seem to happen as much, mostly just things like the sound of someone following me or tapping me while I'm alone. More recently, I was awoken to the feeling of being yanked out of my bed in the morning, which freaked me out, especially even after I was fully awake. And seeing that there was nothing there, but I was still being pulled out of my bed. For some reason, I didn't scream. I pulled myself backwards quickly, and whatever had a hold of me finally let go. After that, I had these nightmares for a week of a woman coming from my closet, or from the hallway. She would be dirty, pale, dressed in all white, and she had long, messy, dark hair. She would come to my bedside and sit beside me, and then put her face as close as she possibly could to mine. I would close my eyes, count to 5, reopen them, and she would be gone. I was able to move again, and I would simply go back to sleep each time, until she finally stopped showing up. I'm not sure if it's related, or if I was even dreaming. For more context, the way it started would be me waking up and seeing her standing there or walking towards me. All I had to do was close my eyes and count to 5, and then she would be gone. Another recent thing is when I was outside talking to my mom, we heard the sound of footsteps and something being dragged above us. The room above the porch is my room. We got up and ran to my room, and nothing had been touched, and no one was there at all. My brother was in his room playing a game with his friends online, so it wasn't him either. Me and my mom went back downstairs, and we continued to hear the sounds. And I still hear them sometimes at night, but I just ignore them now. I believe that's all, but I may update if I forgot something, or if anything new happens. And the OP did update the story. I forgot to mention the most recent thing that happened only a week ago. When I was cleaning with my mom, I had to take a box to the basement. I got to the steps, and I heard this weird sound. I looked into the basement, and I saw a figure behind the door with its hands scratching the door. Well, more like running its nails across it to make sound, since there were no marks. As soon as I said something, it quickly moved away from the door. It went to the little room in my basement where I saw it, and there was nothing there. So, yeah. So, I've always brushed off paranormal activity as coincidence. Or I've tried to find rational reasoning, even though I've always been intrigued by it. But lately, I have no way of explaining it to myself. For some background, I've recently moved house. I used to live in a big old manor house. I'm not sure what year it dates back to, but it's next to its twin, the main house, which dates back to 1781. So, I'm assuming it's around the same time frame. Obviously, with a building this old, it's very daunting, and you would assume that it's haunted. It also got turned into an old people's home at some point, but anyways, I've recently moved into another house that dates back to the 1800s. While I was in the manor house, me and everyone else living there would experience weird things. Nothing dangerous, but weird nonetheless. And we would all brush it off as it's an old house, and I was a kid. Things that would happen frequently, doors closing and opening, electronics and light bulbs turning off and on, doors locking, and loud noises coming from inside the bedrooms. Like banging noises. I don't want to drag this on longer than it needs to be, but I have a lot of experiences in that house. So if anyone wants a more in-depth explanation, feel free to ask questions. But to the point. I've always had extremely vivid dreams that feel and look real. To the point where when I wake up, I still believe that I'm dreaming. Since moving to this house, the same things are happening. Lights turning on and off, etc. We had a weird experience with our Alexas playing music randomly. Old-timey music. But the thing that's making me feel crazy is the dreams. Just before I fall asleep, I keep hearing a man speaking in my room. As if he's next to me, it's that clear, but I'm always on the verge of sleep, so I just brush it off as a dream. But what really got me was a phone call the other day from my mom whilst I was out, asking me where I was. I'd been out all day, and it was 2 a.m. by this time. She called me and told me that she had called out my name when I got home, and I responded, and that she had a conversation with me. But it wasn't me because I wasn't home. She realized when she went into my room that I wasn't there. So, I need help and opinions. So that, my friends, was a collection of some terrifying paranormal stories. Ghost stories, hauntings, other paranormal and supernatural stories. Stories that I hope you enjoyed. I did. Some great stories there. Several of them submitted, several of them from Reddit, several of them from a different subreddit than what I normally use, but definitely some creepy stories, which I won't complain, because paranormal stories can absolutely be terrifying, and I know that you all love them, so yeah. Hopefully, you loved this collection as well as you do every other collection. Did you love this collection? Cool. If you did enjoy the video, the stories, please hit that thumbs up button. It would help. It helps. It helps a lot. You can also subscribe to the channel if you're new and liked what you heard. That helps tremendously as well. And you can leave me a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. Have you ever had a strange experience that you can't explain? If so, throw it in the comments down below. Or, if you want to turn it into a full story, you can just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to send your story my way. You don't have to. If you put it in the comments, I'll read it in the comments. Not necessarily narrate it, but I will read it. And I'll probably comment back on it, letting you know my thoughts. Probably. Most likely. Knowing me. Anyways, you can also do other things like joining. Hit the join button down below. Go to Patreon and join there for early access to content like this and other things, depending on what you sign up for. You can also do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel, just a way of saying thank you. A donation, if you will. Supporting, again, never expected, but always appreciated. And yeah. The other thing you can do is share the video. If you know someone who likes ghost stories, share it. Let them know. Tweet it out. Post it to your Facebooks or your Instagrams or your TikToks or whatever. I'm an old man. Anyways, friends, I hope you have a beautiful night, and remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be, and I hope that you never forget it, and I hope that you never let anyone tell you otherwise. And of course, until I see you again, much love, and sleep well.